The story starts with an epic battle between the Demon King and the hero. The two engage in a battle that exceeds the speed of sound. The fight generates powerful shockwaves, and the two are evenly matched. They become weaker from the fights and are left panting in front of one another. Both drive their swords through each other's chests, killing them in the end. The scene shifts to a bright new morning at Rosewood Academy, where a new transfer student named Blade has arrived. Everything is new to him, and he is eager to make new friends. Blade walks around, greeting every student he meets. After that, he meets Ernest Flaming, a girl known as the Empress by everyone. Blade goes forward to greet her and introduce himself, and says that I don't want to be a hero. I am just here to make a lot of friends. Ernest finds Blade's casual attitude towards becoming a hero and thinks he is unfit to attend the Hero Academy. Blade asks for directions to the headmaster's office from her. She was shocked to see the king in the headmaster's seat. Blade walks very casually to greet the king. That's why Ernest gets triggered. Ernest is asked to leave by the headmaster so that they can talk privately. Blade tells the king of his intentions and requests that he wants to act normally in the school. The king states his intention to repair the damage done by his predecessor's attempt to create heroes. Blade then goes on to the advanced training area where Ernest is in charge of supervising everyone's training. Ernest is surprised to see someone in the advanced training section with such a casual attitude. She challenges Blade to slice through the magical metal armor. Blade accepts the challenge and performs his Dragon Eater move. The attack was devastating and blew a huge hole in the arena wall, and along with completely destroying the target. All of the students who were standing there had their clothes ripped by the shockwave this caused. Later that day, Ernest sits down for lunch at the table reserved for her. Blade notices her alone and decides to join in, calling her his friend. Ernest isn't amused, but Blade sits down and enjoys his lunch. Ernest thinks about Blade that evening, and she feels happy because she has made her first friend. At that moment, the demon sword on the rack begins to vibrate with a voice. In the flashback, we see young Ernest, and the sword demands Ernest to surrender herself. She touches the sword, causing her hair to turn red. However, being the next head of the Flaming family, she cannot surrender. Ernest returns to training the next day with a new ability. The demon sword tries to mentally overpower her, and she nearly injures her training partners Leonard and Sophie. She also challenges Blade, but faints exactly when she does. Blade carries her to the infirmary for medical treatment. Unfortunately, Ernest is under the effect of spells and curses that are beyond the doctor's knowledge. Blade decides to look into what's happening and goes into a secret lab to access the data. He does research on the demon sword that Ernest mentioned earlier. The sword, known as Asmodeus, has a will of its own and provides enormous power to its owner. Blade confronts Ernest about the sword after class. Ernest explains that she accidentally touched the sword when she was 6 years old, giving her the will and a hunger for blood and carnage. Since then, she has been suppressing these urges. Blade tells her to confront the demon and make it recognize her as its owner. She worries that if she fails, the demon will take control completely, but Blade reassures her that if she tries and something like that happens, he will kill the demon by himself. Believing in Blade's abilities, she summons the demon to form a pact with her, and the two engage in an intense battle. She defeats the demon and takes the ownership of the sword. A new day of training begins, and Blade engages in a duel battle with his fellow batchmates. He easily dominates them in a fight. Ernest approaches him and asks him to take the training seriously, but it isn't challenging enough for him. Blade notices something different about Ernest but fails to recognize it as the new hairstyle. Heartbroken, she sends Blade to practice with Sophie. Sophie obeys every word spoken to her as an order. She is used to fighting with her fists and isn't very skilled with a sword. Recognizing her potential, Blade decides to teach her how to use a sword. Blade is drawn to Sophie during the training process and decides to train her after practice hours. Sophie is a quick learner, and by the end of the day, she has slashed through the magical metal armor. Sophie is concerned about surpassing Ernest and hopes to improve her skills, but Blade tells her that getting to her level will be difficult. She uses one of her impressive grasping moves against Blade to take him down. The two become close and decide to continue learning the next day. The next day, when the king asks Blade about his school life, Blade names Sophie as one of his new friends. King then tells him the truth about Sophie's origin. A 12-clone artificial great hero project produced Sophie as its end product. The goal of the project is to artificially give the heroic powers on an ideal candidate. Blade thinks it is his fault that Sophie has to give up her normal life. His existence caused the need for an artificial hero. He takes it upon himself to make sure she lives a normal life and sets out to discover what life is like for a young person. So he approaches the doctor and asks her what a normal life is, and she tells him that it has something to do with youth. He then approaches Leonard about the meaning of youth, and the first thing that comes to mind is love. He approaches Jessica and Claire and asks them about what people do when they're in love, and Claire tells him that lovers go on dates together. Blade then asks Ernest what a date is, and she tells him what lovers do on dates, but she thinks it's too early for them to go on a date. Blade just quickly dashes off saying he's off on a date, and Ernest wonders who he will be dating. Blade then enters the girls' dressing room and asks naked Sophie out on a date, which she accepts. Blade and Sophie, both inexperienced in dating, happily follow a minute-by-minute schedule. Ernest and two other academy girls try to spy on them during the date. They too walk holding hands, eat ice cream, and then feed the fish. Ernest is continuously spying on them. They get close while drinking from the same coconut. Blade's heart is racing faster than usual. They both sit down at a fountain to talk at the end of the date. Blade tells Sophie that they are friends. Sophie believes that friends do not keep secrets from each other. She tells him that she is the subject of the Artificial Great Hero Project and that she is the final product of a 12-model project. She demonstrates this by warping the railing and claiming that she can even change the laws of physics but cannot control them properly. She can also increase her body weight but tends to overdo it, and she can even stop time for 10 seconds. Blade apologizes and admits to her that he is the reason she didn't get to live a normal life. He tells her that he used to be the great hero, but his powers have gone now. He blames himself for not being able to save every single person, and when he is unable to do so, people get upset. Sophie consoles him, telling Blade about the journey she took after being rescued by the king. Along the way, she encountered countless people who praised her for saving them. She assures him that his existence is a gift, and she is actually proud of the fact that she was created to be an artificial great hero and wants to be just like him. Blade decides not to let his past as the great hero bother him. They both promise to keep their identities safe. The next day, during the meal, Ernest announces that the headmaster plans to bring a magical beast to the academy. While Blade looks relaxed, the others find this terrifying. Enormous rumble shakes the room, and the beast falls to the ground, leaving a hole in the roof. Except for Blade, everyone recoils in terror. Blade leaps through the air and slams the dragon on the head. He defeated it with his bare hands, but Blade claims that he's just an ordinary person, saying the dragon is so weak. He throws the plate of delicious food to the dragon. She enjoys it. The dragon transforms into a little girl and hogs into him, refusing to let go, and calling him her dad. Blade names the child Ku and takes on the role of parent. Later that day, while bathing Ku, Ernest takes the initiative to conduct research on dragons transforming into humans, informing Blade that when a dragon is defeated, the flesh dies and the soul assumes the form of the entity that defeated it. The next day during lunchtime, Ernest stares at Blade as he feeds Ku. Ku tells that she can feed herself but prefers to be fed by Blade because it makes the food taste good. She makes tons of demands for love and affection, like giving her good morning smooches and feeding her meals. She tells Blade that he spends too much time staring at women's bodies, which she finds unacceptable. And this surprises his friends. They ask him if he's staring at them, but he says he has no idea what they're talking about. They all think he is guilty. Later that day, Blade notices Ku wandering around the academy, observing students' activities. Ernest comes by his room at night as he puts Ku to sleep. Ernest and Sophie are concerned about whether he fully understands his responsibility. She explains that a dragon's parent constantly hurts them from birth, so when they grow, they only recognize someone stronger than themselves. He assures them that he understands and is committed to taking good care of Ku. When Blade returns to the room, he notices that the window has been left open while Ku has gone to the roof to look at the stars. She tells him that she doesn't need any other friends besides him. On the next day, Blade leaves Ku with the king for daycare, but when he returns, she has already left to go somewhere else. Blade finds her in his room, playing with her toys and imitating his friends. She begins with Ernest and Sophie, then moves on to almost every other student at the academy. Blade realizes she needs friends. Dragons can only accept someone more powerful than themselves. Blade walks down the corridor, banging his head on the wall, depressed that Ku might not be able to find any friends. Ernest stops him and asks him what happened. Blade tells her that only a human who can defeat the dragon can be Ku's friend. Ernest understands the situation and encourages Blade to approach her and other students. The next day they visit the training arena, and Blade asks everyone for help in defeating Ku, but the students are aware that this is a difficult task. But as the higher ranks step in, the students agree to their request. As the students prepare to take her on, Ku comes from the sky, and the king watches from above, saying that this is the type of training he wants to see. Ernest pulls out her sword and tells everyone to prepare for battle. Right away, Ku makes her attack with her fire breath and swings her tail to throw the students off balance. This attack is met with a slash from Ernest's demon sword as she reminds the students to fall into formation. Motivated by this, the Clay Platoon and Kasim Platoon fall into formation with shields protecting them. It forces the Ku to swing her tail onto the shields, opening an opportunity for the Kasim Platoon to take aim and fire their crossbows. The platoons use their strategy well to target the blind spots of the dragon. However, there is one major flaw in their plan. The dragon's sheathed scales render these ordinary attacks useless. After enduring all the attacks, Ku swings her tail again, injuring several students with the attack. The healers get to work trying to heal the injured students. Blade patiently waits for Sophie and Ernest to unleash their moves. Sophie takes a run up and jumps to punch the dragon in the jaw, while Ernest charges her Asmodeus demon sword and strikes the dragon with her attack. Although it was a great attack, but Ku isn't hurt much. However, it was enough to raise a cloud of dust sufficient to make her lose awareness of her surroundings. Ku steps onto a fragile spot in the ground and falls into a pit that Leonard had dug out to trap Ku after the battle had already started, which is fair. Although Ku's body is stuck in the pit, she still uses her fire breath to keep the students at bay. Ernest calls upon the power of Asmodeus several times to strike Ku. Ku spreads out her wings to fly out of the pit but is met with another strike from Ernest. Sophie then uses her great hero power, gravity manipulation, to make Ku's body heavier and slam her into the ground. All of the students then come together to lend their power to Ernest as she charges her sword to land the final blow. The move unleashes a massive ball of energy and defeats Ku. Ku transforms back into a little girl, thinking Blade will disown her for the loss. Blade reassures her that he wouldn't do that. Defeated by the students, Ku now acknowledges them as her friends. His Majesty then prepares to introduce a new VR training method to the students. During the lunch break, the students enjoy their new friendship with Ku. Ernest relishes the food, but Blade realizes something seems off about her. His friends urge him to keep quiet, but he doesn't take the hint and points out her increase in weight. Ernest feels embarrassed and runs back to her room crying. 3 days go by, and Ernest has locked herself in her room. Blade is worried he might never get to speak to her again. With the help of his friends, they decide to go over and apologize. The group goes over to Ernest's room, but she doesn't open the door upon knocking. They use a lockpicker to enter the room and find Ernest hogging a box full of sweets. The sweets have been causing her to become extremely overweight, and Blade makes a promise to help her get back in fighting shape. The next day, they start with running, sit-ups, crunches, push-ups, and every other exercise in the book. She also goes on a strict diet and takes steam baths. None of this helps, and her weight still seems to be increasing. Ernest decides to try something new to burn calories. She takes Blade to testing ground 2. She relies on Blade if the experiment goes south. She calls on the demon, commanding him to consume her flesh for energy and use it as power. She is instantly wrapped in a tornado of flames, while Ernest takes a different form. Her eyes turn black and red, horns spring out of her head, and she begins to speak in 2 voices as she communicates with the demon. Merely being in that form burns a huge number of calories, and it takes only a few minutes to burn through them fully. Once out of energy, Ernest faints and enters beast mode. Overwhelmed by hunger, she charges to eat Claire. Blade steps in with his Dragon Series 3rd sword and uses the wind pressure to rid her of the flames. The next day, Blade and his friends find her hogging the sweets once again, and she says she needs more calories for her next transformation. The next episode begins with a brief visit to the doctor. Blade is feeling better, but the doctor warns that using more than 30% of his full ability may end in death. Jessica brings Maria to Blade around the school corridors. Maria requires Blade to murder her in case she loses control of herself. At lunch, she tells the group that she is not a human but rather a demon. A mystical beast with terrifying abilities lives within her. She was able to hold the powers in check, but since the fight with Ku, she has been losing control over it. Maria is deeply afraid and doesn't want to get kicked out of Rosewood School. Everyone empathizes with Maria and decides to help her overcome this uncertainty. The group heads for the testing grounds 2 arena with the shields powered up to full power. Blade encourages Maria to release all of her strength at once. Initially she hesitates, but Blade reassures her he will take care if anything goes wrong. Maria drops all 5 devices which are holding back her power, and the entire arena erupts into a storm. Her power escalates to over a total of 160 times. As the dust from the storm finally settles, Maria takes her Demon King form while she levitates. Ernest and Leonard charge at her but are instantly blown away with a simple flick of her finger. Sophie quickly grabs the Demon King and uses ultimate gravity to take away her ability to fly and faints. Ku then takes this opportunity to use flame breath, but Demon King simply compresses it into a bean and hurls it back. With this, she successfully took down all of Blade's friends. Blade instantly jumps on the offensive, striking her while the scabbard of his sword is still on. She realizes Blade is trying to take her alive and returns a massive blow, smashing him into the wall of the arena. Blade decides to take the fight seriously and throws a barrage of attacks, but she deflects every single slash and fires an energy beam at him. Blade uses the sword to shield himself, and this ends up shattering the sword. Ernest manages to stumble and hand over Asmodeus. Blade powers up to the maximum and uses Holy Demon Blade to slash at the Demon King. She blocks it confidently, but within a few seconds, the power gets too huge to hold back. The slash cuts through her defenses. Blade faints on the spot and finds himself waking up in the medical care unit. The doctor manages to revive him just in time. His Majesty informs him about her father, the Demon King. The same day he meets her, blending into the rest of the students, but she isn't Maria anymore. Ernest gives her the nickname Mao, and Jessica expresses her fear of never getting to see Maria again. Later that night, Mao shows up at Blade's home and forcefully picks him up for a date. She admits she is attached to him and ironically threatens that she won't leave the place until she kills him. The previous encounter had weakened him, allowing him to only use 15% of his power. In conversation, Mao reveals that Maria still resists the urge to take off the necklace to utilize maximum power, as she hides in the deepest recesses of her mind. Mao explains the split personality of Maria and how Mao was created to escape the unbearable trauma of her father abandoning them in her mind. A few days later, Eliza informs the group that the pendant is most likely a recording device and could possibly bring back Maria. Mao agrees to experiment. They turn on the pendant and a recording plays before them. In the recording, the Demon King addressed Maria's mother, apologizing for leaving her behind as he left to fight a foe. This message speaks to Maria deep inside. Now she knows the real reason her father left. The group bids Mao goodbye forever as she faints to let Maria take over. And it is revealed that both Mao and Maria manage to coexist, and Maria lets Mao take over in combat with Blade. In the next day, Blade, along with Ernest, Sophie, and Ku, venture out into the city. On the way, they find an underpass blocked by a cart full of cargo. Upon inspection, they figure it was being pulled by a centaur. The centaur and Blade recognize each other. However, Blade requests her not to mention him as the great hero. The centaur introduces herself as Dione. Blade and his friends help Dione take the cargo to His Majesty. His Majesty assigns Dione a new task, to teach at Rosewood Academy. Dione begins her first class by showing off her demon lance as she bursts through multiple god iron cubes presumed to be indestructible. This maneuver not only destroys the cubes but also melts them. Dione introduces herself to the class, claiming to have fought alongside the great hero. Blade's friend feels that Dione has known Blade for a while. They decide to be friendly to her in the bath and get answers. Blade is bathing Ku next door and instantly storms in, stopping them in their tracks. After some persuasion, Dione tells them about Blade's childhood without dropping a hint that he was the great hero. Later, Blade and Ernest go shopping for groceries. On the way, they see one of the 4 continental sacred birds, the Samur. It quickly swoops down and destroys one of the freight wagons. Ernest prepares to draw her sword but is stopped by Blade. The bird doesn't hurt anyone and quickly flies away. Blade and Ernest trace back the cargo to His Majesty and inquire with him. His Majesty reveals the Samur egg in the freight wagon from the previous day. His Majesty explains the reason behind keeping the egg too. It requires 2 conditions to hatch: placing it at the same height as the 10,000-year-old tree and bathing it in the sunlight of the setting sun before it can hatch. The parent birds had built a nest in a very poor location to hatch, and His Majesty saw changing the location as a training opportunity for the students of the academy. The next day, the students assemble to lift the egg. Blade devises a plan whereby the students can divert the Simurg's attention from the lifted egg. The Simurg searches throughout the city for the egg, destroying every freight wagon they see. The students engage to defend the city from the Simurgs. The students do their level best to fight the Simurgs until evening. It is finally time to lift the egg as the sun begins to set. This draws the attention of the Simurgs, and the students urge Blade to carry the egg to the top as the lift stops working midway. The rest of the students swear to defend the egg at all costs. Dione joins him in running up the wall and gives him a lift to carry the egg to the top before sunset. They are welcomed by His Majesty, while Blade learns that a Simurg had once saved His Majesty's life, and he wished to repay it. The Simurg continues to approach His Majesty with anger, knocking over the egg. Sophie steps in at the last moment and uses her time-stopping ability. This allows Blade to quickly step in with his Dragon Eater attack too, and stop the Simurg in its tracks. The Simurg egg finally hatches at the right altitude in the light of the setting sun, and the hatchling assumes Blade to be its parent. We see Blade slashing through each of his batchmates before finally facing Sophie as blood drops off his sword. She questions her ability to take on Blade, even if she gave her everything. Blade confirms there's only one way to find out. Sophie uses her time-stopping ability and deals 3 fatal blows to Blade. Once it's done, Blade still stands strong. Blade reveals the adamantine body technique that he used to toughen up his body. He approaches Sophie and drives a sword through her chest, killing her. Everyone snaps out of the virtual reality, and His Majesty explains that it's part of a lost stream of magic called science, explaining its wonder in practical training. His Majesty changes the scene to Candyland for more training. Ernest goes completely rogue and enjoys tearing down Leonard as he compliments her. She searches for Blade to be her next victim. Just then, Clay and Kasim have a tag match with Claire and Jessica. The boys boast about never having lost to the girls, but the girls are determined to change that. They question why the boys aren't willing to lose against them. The boys drop their guard for a moment, and the two of them strike, claiming victory. Ernest walks in with a vicious expression as she approaches Blade. She expresses the enjoyment of killing as she charges to stab Blade. Blade uses Endless Flash to end everyone. Snapping back to reality, Ernest cries about her loss to Blade. His Majesty boasts about his idea, but Ernest is infuriated due to the humiliation she had to face. Ernest takes control of the computer and sets it to the toughest modes possible. He plugs the computer into His Majesty and sends him into the virtual reality world to face the demons. He asks Siren to set it to respawn him after every death until nightfall. Everyone is hungry and walks off for lunch except for Clay and Kasim. The two sit and hang their heads in shame. During the lunch break, Clay and Kasim sit away from the group. The girls urge them to come over and eat along with them, but the two feel too humiliated to join them for lunch. Blade gets Ernest up to speed about what happened. Blade's explanation only makes them feel worse, and they shift further. Blade approaches Dione with the flyer for the newly built Thermi. Dione takes all of them over to the Rosewood Thermi, a large and beautiful bath, and the group decides on mixed bathing. Blade is surprised to see Maria and not Mao. She explains that Mao would have taken off the swimsuit. Jessica taunts that all the boys there aren't 5-year-olds. Claire notices Clay and Kasim are aloof from the group. Ernest pops out with a towel wrapped around herself as she is too shy. Just then, His Majesty shows up nude, claiming the Thermi is meant to be entered nude, but Ernest argues that it's mixed bathing. He even tells her that towels aren't allowed in the Thermi. He exclaims that he wants to see the girls without clothes. Everyone is disgusted with his behavior. Jessica encourages her to take it off, explaining it's not a big deal considering she was naked the first time she wielded the demon sword. Siren knocks His Majesty out as he creates a ruckus, not allowing anyone to enjoy, but Ernest regrets not taking it off. Claire and Jessica approach the boys to sympathize with them. Claire calls their win a fluke to make them feel better and apologizes for winning. This makes the boys feel even more humiliated, and they run away. Later that night, Blade tries to make them feel better with a pep talk, telling them it's alright to lose. Clay explains not wanting to lose to Jessica as he likes her. Blade claims to like her too, but they realize he means it in a different way. Kasim also confesses to liking Claire. Just then, Ku bursts into the room through the windows, revealing that she was there listening all along. She advises them to become stronger, as females like males stronger than them. Ku recommends they do so by training under Blade. The girls have a girls' night to celebrate their win over the boys. Ku hears their conversation and recommends that they train harder, as boys are attracted to strong females. Claire suggests they skip practice and let the boys become stronger. They run through a few ideas, like purposely letting the boys win and skipping practice. The next day, they hop into the virtual reality once again to settle the battle. The boys and girls display their fighting spirits, trained under Blade and Ernest. They have a furious battle, and the girls emerge victorious once again. At the end of the battle, they shake hands and settle their differences. The boys also discover that all the girls helped them learn their fighting spirits. The boys jokingly claim that all the girls were ganging up on them. Ernest yells at them and questions them for thinking it's wrong to fall in love with someone who is stronger than them. In the next scene, we see the girls finds a robot who is looking for Blade. They find it cute and offer to take it to Blade. Meanwhile, Blade charges up in the arena with Ku, the intention being to save the energy for when it's needed. Just then, the girls arrive with the robot. Blade is spooked at first sight and uses Dragon Eater to blow the robot to pieces. The girls are enraged to see this and scold Blade. He tells them it is a guardian and will put itself back together soon. The next day, the android reappears in a completely different form, looking almost like a girl. She springs up and asks Blade if her new form is pleasing, as she has taken one after analyzing the male psyche. She hops back and initiates an attack on Blade. Blade instantly unleashes a flurry of Dragon Eater attacks, destroying it once again. The girls scolded him for not having mercy on a girl. The same evening, the android rebuilds herself. She mentions that she is currently in observation mode as she wishes to defeat Blade. Claire requests that she join them, as they will figure out a way to defeat Blade. They sit down to discuss strategies and start off by asking her why she wants to defeat Blade. She responds that he infiltrated her intimate zone, desecrating her chassis repeatedly. Blade jumps to defend himself, saying he only trespassed in an area she was guarding. He also mentioned that His Majesty himself had given him the master key to the library. She counters it, saying he didn't meet all the requirements. Blade clarifies that he only broke in to help Ernest while researching Asmodeus. At the meeting, they decide to separate Iona from the mother computer, making her independent and causing her to lose her ability to reconstruct herself. They explain their intention, saying this will cause Blade to rethink before attacking. The next day, the students gathered around the arena to watch the battle between Blade and Iona. Right before the battle starts, Iona informs Blade about the modification. During the battle, Blade is forced to hold back his strength to avoid destroying Iona. She takes the upper hand and attacks Blade. Having no way to attack, Blade submits and admits defeat. He appreciates her for not letting him use his small attacks. Later that day, the group sits down to enjoy lunch. The group is surprised to see her able to consume food. Iona explains that she was designed to process organic matter and convert it into energy. She tells Claire about her existential crisis, as in moments like these she would turn to the mother computer for guidance. She feels empty without a supervisor anymore. To solve this crisis, she requests Blade to be her master, as every android has a self-destruct system. It doesn't have a supervisor. She also tells them about the 84-hour self-destruct counter, which begins if she doesn't have a supervisor. Blade agrees to give it a try and see if it works. The next day, she takes orders from Blade, eating snacks while wearing a traditional maid's dress. Sophie gets jealous seeing Iona steal her character, and the two end up getting into a competition to see who can please him more. Sophie dresses up and behaves like a cat to please him, and Iona dresses up like a bunny. The two also engage in an armless fight at the arena, but ultimately turn to the use of powers before Blade interrupts and stops them. Later that night, both Sophie and Iona insist on watching him fall asleep to prove their devotion. Once Blade falls asleep, the two have a conversation where Iona reveals a lot about herself and what shapes her, and Sophie relates to her feelings. Iona tells Sophie about how she was secluded from society for most of her life and that Blade was the only one who would visit. Overnight, the two grow closer and form a bond. The next day, as the group gathers around the table for breakfast, Blade commands her to show him the counter. Unfortunately, the counter has slowed down but hasn't stopped. The students are saddened to see that it hasn't worked. Iona wishes to stay with them for as long as possible but promises to leave after that as she doesn't wish to injure anyone. The students throw a send-off party to cherish their last few moments together, with singing, dancing, and many more activities to make the night memorable. Sophie urges her to enjoy it as much as possible, clarifying that she is saying that as a friend and not as a command. After celebrating the night, the time finally comes to send Iona off. Iona steps into one side of the arena as it gets concealed by a transparent barrier. Sophie, Claire, and Ernest say their goodbyes. Iona especially thanks Sophie for showing her what being a human is like and gives her regards to Blade before thanking everyone there as they watch the counter tick down to 0. As the counter strikes 0, everyone expects her to detonate, but she doesn't. Everyone looks confused. Just then, Blade appears from under the ground. Ernest scolds him for skipping the send-off. He tells them that he had gone to speak to Mother to persuade her to reconnect with Iona, thus exterminating the threat of self-destruction. Iona takes down Blade with a hug out of gratitude. The next episode begins with Blade defeating all his classmates in their sparring round. Leonard remains the only one standing and challenges Blade to impress Ernest. Blade defeats him simply by dodging his lance charge, leaving Leonard feeling miserable about being unable to impress Ernest. The next day, Mao and Leonard discuss their desire to defeat Blade, and she encourages him towards the goal. Leonard decides to fight Blade, as that is the only way to gain recognition from the Empress. The students call for a meeting with Leonard to discuss a strategy to defeat Blade. Claire comes up with a plan to attack him in his sleep, and Jessica suggests they poison him. Ernest finds these ways to be cowardly, but Eliza justifies them by saying Blade is a superorganism. Ernest endorses the use of bows and lances against Blades. Unable to agree on a particular method, they decide to each try their own. The next day, Ernest uses Leonard's lance to attack Blade, but ends up breaking it. Claire attempts to attack him in his sleep, but is attacked by Iona. She keeps a watch over Blade at night. The next evening, Leonard attempts to fight Blade with his fixed-up lance, but it malfunctions and explodes before he can even attack. Blade defeats every one of his classmates with a single strike. Ernest decides to try some new competitions including rock, paper, scissors, the ice bath challenge, and the steam bath challenge. He emerges victorious in every one of the competitions. The students run out of challenges for Blade. They get ready to give up trying to overpower Blade. However, Ernest is still determined. Just then, they remember the strategy they developed for Iona when she held her life hostage against Blade. The group decides to proceed with something similar. The next day, during the medical class, 3 terrorists wearing masks raid the class and hold the teacher hostage. The girls get jealous of the teacher as she will be saved by Blade. They get into a quarrel and ask the terrorists to hold them hostage as well. Meanwhile, Blade sits in his place with no clue what being held hostage even means. Ku explains the concept of hostages. However, Blade is still not able to grasp the concept. He abruptly questions Leonard and the boys about their masks, telling them he knows it's make-believe. Kasim decides to proceed with the plan, threatening to use the girls as food if Blade doesn't accept defeat. Leonard pressures Blade to give up as he did against Iona, but Blade refuses, seeing the difference in the situation. Leonard grabs Ernest and holds a sword at her neck, threatening to slit it. In response, Blade uses a slash to send a roaring wind toward the boys, ripping away their clothes and rendering them naked. Ernest gets infuriated and attacks Blade, along with others, and they are once again humbled by Blade and give up hopes of defeating him. We see Blade questioning Ernest about a celebration happening in the lunchroom. She is astonished to find out that he isn't aware of what it is, and she reveals to him that it is a birthday celebration. Later that day, she discusses it with the girls over tea time, and Dione informs her that his birthday is in about a month's time. The group begins to plan something special for Blade. Just then, His Majesty overhears them and interrupts to tell them that tonkatsu curry will be a great present. The next day, the Emperor opens the gates to all the students and assigns them the task of venturing out and consuming a total of 100 million calories for each person. He also warns them about the dangerous beasts roaming the forests and advises caution. Claire and Jessica are found hunting in tribal clothes while a beast chases Claire down. Leonard attempts to rescue her but is knocked away instantly. They manage to trick and trap the beast in a pit. Meanwhile, at night, the students work at their settlement, with each person doing their assigned job. Later that night, while Blade rests in the bath, Ernest approaches him and sits beside him in the pool. She asks him about his past and begins to lean into him. Just then, Claire bursts out of the bushes and pushes her away. The next day, all the students assemble in front of the Emperor as he announces a new goal, as they are on the path to accomplishing the first one with ease. The second goal entails collecting multiple ingredients, and the students happily oblige. Ernest, Blade, and the others face off against the first ingredient, the cabbage cultivar. Ernest holds back using her flaming sword as they need it raw, but manages to overcome it with the help of all the students. Right after that, they head over to a boxing corn, where Blade puts on boxing gloves and engages in battle against the corn to overpower it. The group goes on to collect several other ingredients until they arrive at a field of massive sunflowers. They overlook 3 giant sunflowers in the middle of the field and are instantly attacked by energy beams shot out of the sunflowers. Ku and Mao unleash a flurry of attacks on the sunflowers to defeat them. The group then comes across a field of huge carrots that scream extremely loudly when tugged at. Being a cyborg, Iona rips them out one by one while the others cover their ears. That night, the students feast on their dinner as the Emperor tells them about the task they accomplished. He also informs them about the final ingredient they will have to face the next day. On the next day, the group faces off against the Beast King. Right before the battle can begin, the beast is slashed in half by another monster. The Emperor orders the kids to fight the behemoth, as its meat will be a fine choice. The students unleash a barrage of attacks on the behemoth. Sophie, Iona, Ku, Mao, and Ernest attack, but are unable to deal any damage. Just before the behemoth can fire a beam of energy, Leonard steps in between and uses absolute defense to protect the people. Blade steps up to use his attack, but Mao brings it to his attention that he has to exceed his strength limit to initiate the attack. Blade requests Mao's help, and they both hold hands. Mao leans over and kisses him while confessing her love for him. The group initiates a series of attacks. Sophie strikes first with her gravity manipulation technique, followed by a positronium cannon strike by Iona. All the other students follow with their own attacks as Blade and Mao team up to unleash the Holy Demon Blade and end the behemoth. Upon victory, Blade lies in Mao's lap after exhausting his energy in the attack. The next day, Blade visits the doctor, but she informs him he can now use 18% of his power. Upon entering the lunchroom, he is greeted by a big surprise from his friends. They tell him it is his birthday, as despite not knowing his actual birth date, they know the date he was fostered. They offer him to feast on the meal they prepared for him from the ingredients they hunted down. Blade takes a bite from the dish but holds something back. The Emperor asks him to open up, to which he recalls an old saying that boys don't cry. The Emperor assures him it's all right and watches Blade cry tears of joy. In a training session in the arena, the boys strangely see Sophie's doppelganger carrying a sword into the arena. Thinking it is Sophie, they request her to use the sword, and she unleashes the special move Dragon Smash on the target and also rips Clay and Kasim's clothes off. Sophie steps in between them and tells Blade that she will protect him. Everyone is astonished to see two Sophies. Just then Yoon uses Dragon Smash to disappear. Following that, Yoon returns to a warehouse filled with more clones who inquire about her encounter at the academy. They get frustrated that Yoon returned without completing the mission. Trios talks down on her, to which she responds by telling Sync to destroy her. Do kisses her to transmit empirical data through mucosal contact. They go around transmitting the data to each other to see what is unfurled at the arena. Just as they learn Yoon used Dragon Smash, the warehouse blows up as they taunt her. The same day, the students practice combat in the arena. Duke shows up and a fight erupts between her and Blade. Just then, Sophie shows up and challenges Duke to a fight, but she quickly runs away. At lunch, the students discuss the recent happenings of the doppelganger showing up. Blade notices Sophie being a little strange as she swears to protect him. Back in the warehouse, the prototypes discuss killing Blade. An unknown entity then summons them, reiterating their mission and urging them to kill Blade. That night, Sophie walks into Blade's room while he is asleep. She encounters Yona, who informs her that everything is alright. Sophie then leaves the room and encounters Yoon. Sophie tries to talk her out of it, but Yoon instead attacks Sophie. Sophie deflects the hit and throws her on the ground to mount her, but stops right before striking. Sophie decides to let her go. The next day, Sync shows up in the VR world and begins chasing Blade, attempting to punch him. Blade gets hit on the head by a stone and trips, allowing Sync to beat his head into a pulp. Exiting the VR, his friends explain that Sync thought it was all real and left. Later that day, Sync bursts through the building wall looking for Blade and is infuriated. Blade and Yana run through the corridors as Sync chases them. Just then, Do bursts into the corridors and chases Blade. Blade runs into the hall, where the mages are ready to cast their spells. The mages cast their spells but are unable to stop the two. Ernest and Blade step in to defend the mages from the two doppelgangers. Sync and Quater join hands and create a black hole, sucking everything in its proximity. Just then, Sophie jumps in and conceals the black hole in her palms. Blade finally sees all of Sophie's doppelgangers as they walk away from the scene. Later that day, Sophie regains consciousness and apologizes for the recent happenings. Blade assures her that there is nothing to worry about. Sophie proceeds to explain that the clones were created with the same technology as she is by the Artificial Great Hero Project. She tells him about how His Majesty rescued her and how she changed her ways. Blade expresses that he would love to make friends with them and have them enroll in the school. However, Sophie regretfully believes that isn't possible as they are programmed to be that way. We see students confronting His Majesty over the disappearance of Sophie. Ernest lashes out at His Majesty for letting her leave, but Blade points out the fact that he isn't happy about it himself. The students decide to leave at dawn to help Sophie, despite knowing she left with the intention of keeping them safe. The next morning, Blade decides to go in search of Sophie and is surprised to see everyone there with the same intent. The group reaches the abandoned warehouse and spots Sophie. They confront her about her leaving, upon which she explains the creation of the Artificial Great Heroes and that a person had continued the project despite it being officially closed. She confesses that her past is caught up and that she should return to where she came from. Ernest and Blade comfort her and pledge to help her save the other Artificial Great Heroes. The scene switches to the artificial heroes as they seek advice from an old scientist, and Yoon receives an invitation from the group inviting them to fight Blade. Blade arrives in the middle of the arena ready to battle while his friends gather in the stands. Just then, the artificial great heroes arrive to fight Blade. They engage in a 1v5 against him and take the upper hand. Ernest feels the urge to help Blade, but is held back by Sophie. The artificial great heroes then begin using their special powers to attack Blade. Just then, Blade's friends toss him capsules to insert in his sword, allowing him to counter their special attacks. The artificial heroes fall after using their special attacks. The third hero manages to shatter Blade's sword before falling. This leaves Blade vulnerable to the attacks of the remaining heroes. Sophie swoops in to save him from their attacks, allowing Blade to counter the remaining two heroes. Just then, the sun rises, causing the last remaining hero to collapse. She claims her days are limited to 14. Blade begins to look for ways to save them. They check if the creator is able to extend their lifespan, but find the creator has been dead even before they could be deployed. Eliezer apologizes as his science cannot do anything to revive them in the limited time. Sophie requests Blade gather all her sisters and claims there is one way to keep them alive. The last hero uses her artificial hero ability, allowing Blade to take control and transfer their consciousness to Sophie. The next day, Blade wakes up in the hospital and has Yoon visit him through Sophie. She swears to defeat him after he recovers. She switches back to Sophie, and she thanks him for his sacrifice. The scene changes to a dragon fighting the students in the arena but failing to take it down. Just then, Blade swoops in, defeating it with one blow. And that's how the season 1 ends. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Let me know what you think about this anime in the comment. And as always, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all in the next video.